Julian Genter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Green Party is happy to vote in support of the Credit Contracts and Financial Services Bill at its second reading. The Green Party has long called for better regulation of third-tier lenders, that is, payday lenders, money lenders, those that we are known as loan sharks. Third-tier lending at extortionate interest rates has been increasing in New Zealand and in other jurisdictions over the past decade. It is both a symptom and a cause of growing inequality. The gap between those who have and those who have not is growing in New Zealand and in other countries, and wealth is being concentrated in the hands of fewer people. And post-GFC, although the people who arguably caused the global financial crisis...
Order. I'm sorry to the member. Look, there's this banter going across here. I'm trying to hear the member speaking. Julian Genter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, post the global financial crisis, a number of people lost their jobs and they found it more difficult to put the food on the table and to pay their ever-increasing power bills. And predatory lenders set up precisely in those areas of greatest social and economic deprivation and take advantage of limited financial literacy and a desperate need for cash to make ends meet. It's not enough to improve financial literacy and regulate loan sharks alone. Part of the solution is addressing the underlying causes of this growing inequality, and that means taking a hard look at our tax system, which currently favors the wealthy few. We need to look after our children, 250,000 of whom are living in poverty. There are many steps the government can take to do these things, like raising the minimum wage, paying a living wage themselves, and working towards a living wage across the country. Investing in smart, affordable transport and kid-friendly streets. Our Kids at the Heart policy, which is focused on our education hubs, making sure that kids are looked after from the beginning, is going to help deal with some of this growing inequality. But the immediate issue of regulating third-tier lenders is finally being addressed in this bill. And even though we don't agree with everything in the bill, there are a few areas with which we certainly differed with the government's policy, and that's expressed in the minority view. We are very happy to finally see the very good work that was done as an outcome of the review of the CCCFA. And I have to acknowledge the excellent work of officials in this area, and especially the work of my colleague Carol Beaumont on Select Committee, who is really the expert in this area. I'm certainly not, and I had to look to her expertise. She really advocated for really important changes in this bill, and I was so happy that she was there to do that. And so we will see truck shops and other lenders covered by this legislation, which is incredibly important. And as Carol Beaumont said in her speech earlier this evening, one of the biggest disappointments of this legislation is that it doesn't include any provision for setting a cap on interest rates. Now, what is disappointing is that we didn't get any compelling evidence or reasons why this wasn't being included in the bill. And we certainly asked for it. We heard a huge number of submissions, and it is fair to say that some submitters were not in favor of interest rate caps, most notably the Bankers Association. But there were quite a few submitters who were in favor, and there certainly is a lot of evidence that other jurisdictions are using interest rate caps to protect consumers from spiraling out of control debt. And as Carol Beaumont said, New Zealand's one of the last remaining countries not to have a provision for interest rate caps. So while I am certain that the provisions in this bill will go some way to protecting consumers, those who are most vulnerable, I am concerned that we haven't given ourselves even the opportunity to try interest rate caps. So the reasons given for not including interest rate caps were simply that there might potentially be a lack of access to short-term credit. And the other reason was that the interest rate cap would become the target and that everybody would automatically put up interest rates to whatever the cap was. And I have to say these aren't really overwhelmingly compelling reasons for not including some sort of provision. I mean, I'm an empiricist. I very much believe that we can't know everything before trying it. empiricist. Yeah, no, empiricist, sorry. So basically, I think that when it comes to policy, it's very easy to make up reasons for not trying something. But actually, if most of our trading partners and other comparable jurisdictions are doing something, then maybe we should give ourselves the opportunity to at least try it. And seeing as how it took so many years for this legislation to come before the House, we're not going to easily have that ability to include it in the future. I mean, it takes time. We consulted on it. It was certainly spoken about in the submissions process. This was the logical place to at least introduce the possibility of the government imposing an interest rate cap or allowing the Reserve Bank to set one. And of course, if all these hypothetical drawbacks of interest rate caps did occur and there weren't other means of addressing them, then we could always roll it back. But we should at least try it because it is an important tool. Why would you restrict the number of tools in your toolkit to deal with predatory lenders, as we know that it is a growing problem and one that is increasingly affecting people in New Zealand who are the most vulnerable and the people that we should be looking out for the most. The lack of access to short-term credit is perhaps something that the government should be seeking to address so that those who have the least really should not be forced to go out and get a payday loan or a short-term loan in order to put food on the table. That shouldn't be a reason. You shouldn't need access to credit to get your kids enough food to eat or to make sure that they've got warm clothes or that you're able to pay your power bill. There are other problems, deeper problems, that need to be addressed in this country, and I think that allowing predatory lenders to go out and charge interest rates of well over 100% to people who have potentially, and I have to say that even most people aren't very good at understanding compounding interest. So people who are just struggling to get enough to eat and to put food on the table might not be in the best position to understand the consequences of interest rates that are expressed simply in a daily rate, what that's going to mean as it compounds. So simply put, I think the Green Party is happy to finally see this legislation come to its second reading. It is mostly very, very good, and we're disappointed that the government seems to, for quite ideological reasons, have neglected to include an important tool in the toolkit to address the problems that we face. The other disappointing thing, I think, was the last-minute amendments around credit and default fees, which were made entirely at the behest of the New Zealand Bankers Association. With some scaremongering claims I'm sure they made about the increased costs to them. But again, I thought it was disappointing that the amendments came at the last minute. We weren't presented with very compelling evidence for the wording changes, and I think although we have to admit that at least the government did see this legislation come before the House. That's good, and there are some improvements. Ultimately, there were still some ideological policy decisions being made by the National Party, which are, let's look after the bankers and let's ideologically be opposed to caps on interest rates, even though it might help those who are the most vulnerable in our society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Sam Lotawinga.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to speak on this, the second reading of the Credit Contracts Financial Services Law